It's the night before the Eagles' second preseason game, and you can go to 97.3 ESPN.com. John's 5 things to watch versus the Bills. John, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Josh.
Good to have you on, John. So, the first things first, which is, when I'm looking at this game, the first thing that comes to mind for me is, oh, that's right, there's 2 former Eagles who are on the Bills who were both involved in, very interesting trades. So this is a return for Jordan Matthews, his first game back in Philadelphia, and also a return for LaShawn McCoy. So how do you think that will affect the dynamic of the game, despite the fact that it's only a preseason game?
Yeah, I think it would obviously be a much bigger deal if it were a regular season environment. I think from Jordan's standpoint, it would have been big either way because he was just moved, and obviously Shady was moved by a different regime. It's been a while. So that's not directly in the rearview mirror. But the fact that, Ronald, Darby, and Jordan Matthews are traded for each other and basically playing against each other the same week. And unfortunately for Jordan, he fractured a sternum, a chip fracture of a sternum. So he's not going to be able to go. And it's a little bit disappointing. It would have been interesting to see just how he handled it because he is so popular in that locker room. And I think it would have been emotional for him to come back so quickly. For Darby, he's going to be thrown into the deep end. He has been to this point. He's the Eagles' starting left cornerback, and he's going to be out there. Limited, obviously, as all starters, but he's going to be a big part of this team moving forward.
I spoke with Teron Davenport earlier, your buddy John Teron, and he was talking about the fact that there's going to be a bit of a learning curve for the Eagles' offense because this will be the first potential appearance for Alshon Jeffrey in the offense. You have a situation where no Jordan Matthews, so there goes Carson Wentz security blanket. What's Nelson Agholor going to look like in the slot? Are we going to see more 2 tight end formations now? So there's a lot of different questions along with this offense learning for life without Jordan Matthews.
Yeah, from Carson's standpoint, I think it's the biggest because those two were very close on and off the field, perhaps even more off the field. And they were just friends, and it went far beyond football. From that standpoint, though, Alshon's going to play, I believe, not guaranteed. Doug still was hedging a bit, but I think he's going to get a little bit of time, not much. And I would imagine if Carson Wentz plays a series, he'll play a series. If it's 2 series, he'll play 2 series. But for each of them, it should be a cameo. Remember, Nelson Agholor, though, has been playing essentially in the slot since back in the spring because Jordan had the issues with the knee tendonitis. And he spent most of the spring on the first team in the slot. So I think that's been something that's been in the works for a while. So I don't think that'll be as big a deal. And when you're talking about security blanket, as much as Jordan was, I think that's Zach Ertz's role. I really do. As far as who Carson Wentz is going to look for in those types of situations. So I think it's pretty defined already. To me, the biggest question is, can Nelson do the job? He can do everything. If you think about, his position title, it's receiver. He can do everything a receiver is asked to do. As far as running routes, he's well above average. I would argue that's one of the strengths of his game. I believe he gets more separation than any other receiver on this team. Doug Pederson mentioned his ability as a blocker. He's really well-rounded. The only thing he doesn't do is catch the football consistently. And if you're a receiver, well, you better receive it. And I don't know if he can do that consistently.
I was mentioning earlier, John, about the fact that, we've everybody's seen the video of Jerry Rice now online running routes at 49ers practice, and he's running and passing and catching passes and doing drills he's probably better at 54 than half the league. And part of that's because Jerry was so committed to his craft. He was he embodied the concept of hard work beats talent every time talent doesn't work hard. He embodied that theme. Not that Jerry didn't have talent, but he maximized his talent on such an immense level. That's why he's so great, that he can be 54 and he's still running routes better than half the league. And it's just like, if we could take half of what Jerry Rice's work ethic and desire and passion was and just stick it in Agholor, I think we actually might have a pretty good receiver.
See, there's where I'll disagree with you, and I'll tell you why. Because I think Nelson works hard. I'm not comparing anyone to Jerry Rice, and I think you're being kind. I think he runs routes better than 95% of this league at age 54 or whatever he is. But that's the thing. If you talk about receivers like him, Marvin Harrison would be the other guy who just was so perfect in everything he did as far as the route tree goes. I think Nelson Agholor is one of the top 20% of receivers in this league when it comes to running routes. And part of that is because he does work so hard. And he does work hard catching the football. He's always there after practice, doing drills, catching from the jugs gun, doing eye discipline drills with tennis balls. He does all of that. He's just not natural catching the football. And sometimes it comes down to that. There are guys who are just, Chris Carter being the most notable. I think he's got the best hands probably in the history of the NFL. Catches everything. I covered him for a long time. I kid you not, Josh. You would go through training camp, through an entire regular season. You might see the football hit the ground twice in a calendar year watching Chris Carter. He caught everything. Nelson just can't catch the football consistently, and I don't know if you can teach that.
So then, that being said, because you look at guys, modern guys like Odell Beckham Jr., and I think you could credit part of it to the gloves that he wears. Is it possible that maybe Agholor, part of his catching issues is maybe he needs a certain kind of glove to help him do that? Because we've seen, everyone's seen the video of Odell Beckham making those catches at practice, but he's also wearing some, pretty nice gloves. And a lot of people have said that those gloves that these receivers wear now can either help or hurt your ability to catch.
Yeah, I think it depends on the guy. It depends on the situation. I think those tacky gloves help more than they hurt for most guys. But if you see Odell, and there's a couple videos coming out of Giants camp this week of him making those ridiculous one-handed catches. That's just, he's got the massive hands, he's got the big hands, and he's just got the coordination to do it. And that's something I kind of talked about with Carter. That's a lot of times that's innate, because I see, especially with deep balls, we've seen it in the past where Nelson just doesn't seem to be able to track it properly, and he gets lost. And you saw it last week in Green Bay with the fastball coming at him. Now that's not an easy catch, but a top tier NFL receiver makes that 99 out of 100 times, and the ball just goes through his hands. I think his issues have to do with tracking the football, and for whatever reason, he just lets it get on top of him. Whether he doesn't see it quickly enough, and you can look bad at times when that's the case. And as I said, watching him every day in practice, I see the work ethic. I see him working on his deficiencies consistently. And when you see that and you don't see the improvement, at some point you say, well, maybe that's just natural. Maybe it's just not in him.
He is John McMullen. He covers the Eagles for us at 97.3 ESPN.com. Check out his things to watch versus Buffalo as the Eagles get ready to play the Buffalo Bills in preseason action. You can hear the Eagles versus Bills tomorrow night with pregame coverage starting at 6 here on 97.3 ESPN. John, one of the things you highlight is the cornerback position, specifically the nickel, because with Darby, he is the new starting outside corner. That pushes Patrick Robinson down the depth chart. You're saying Robinson's been getting some time on the inside. So do you think there's a battle right now between Brooks and Robinson for that number 3 corner nickel spot?
Yeah, I think it is going to be a battle, and I think ultimately it could end up being Malcolm Jenkins. I mean, it seems like we always end up where you try these guys and you throw, whether it's Ron Brooks, Patrick Robinson, Aaron Grimes obviously has been in there at times with the first team. And you can go back 3 years ago when Chip Kelly was still here, and you remember how many players, it was like a cast of thousands. You remember Corey Shepard tore his ACL as a rookie.
Yes.
And he was supposed to be the nickelback, and they threw everybody in that position. And then week one showed up, and Malcolm Jenkins was the nickelback. And last year, Jim Schwartz went out and got Ron Brooks. And after he got hurt, Malcolm Jenkins was the nickelback. So it's like they don't want to do it, but at some point, if he's the best option, you have to do it. I still think Ron Brooks has the inside track if he's healthy, and he hurt his hamstring last week. He hasn't practiced all week. He's probably not going to play. Not probably. He's definitely not going to play against Buffalo. But I think Jim Schwartz is obviously comfortable with him, so he has the inside track to win that job. But you might see it being a game plan thing. And if you're facing, say, Dallas, and it's Cole Beasley, well, then you're going to want to have a Ron Brooks or a Patrick Robinson or an Aaron Grimes. But if it's Larry Fitzgerald, you might have Malcolm Jenkins in the slot. The interesting part of that is by signing Corey Graham, they feel much more comfortable if they have to move Malcolm into the slot because they think he's a big upgrade over Jalen Watkins if they have to go to that big nickel and insert a safety.
You know, I talked with Toronto earlier, and he mentioned that he could see them running a lot of 3 safety sets, even with having a nickel corner in there as well, because they would just move Jenkins down to the slot, and Jenkins could maybe guard be the defender who covers a tight end or something like that. So, do you think that with Darby, Graham, Jenkins, and all these different pieces, that we could see a lot of different lineups from Jim Schwartz, not just for one game, but from quarter to quarter on game day?
Yeah, I don't think so, because Jim likes to keep things simple. He really does, and he believes in that, and he wants guys to play fast. And once you start mixing things like that from quarter to quarter, forget it. Like I said, from game to game is one thing, and I think it's natural if you have a really, really shifty slot receiver like Beasley or Julian Edelman or somebody like that. You can't put Malcolm Jenkins on that type of receiver. That's just unfair to him. So I think from game to game it's a possibility, but as far as matching up that quickly, I think all of a sudden then you have guys thinking. And when you're thinking about what's the formation, you're certainly not playing fast because, and that's always, Jim will say time and time again, that's the goal, to have guys doing things second nature and playing as fast and as quickly as possible. So I don't think he wants to bog things down to that point. So you're going to see a traditional nickel. The question is it a traditional slot corner, or is it the big nickel with the 3 safeties? Ultimately, it's definitely going to be Jordan Hicks and Nigel Bradham as the nickel linebackers if they're healthy.
On the offensive side of the ball, John, you have been emphasizing for the last few days, you've been on the fact that the Eagles didn't run the ball nowhere close to enough what you should, and Matt McMullen threw the ball way too much. You pointed out also in your things to watch for in the Bills game. Now, Doug Pederson says you want to try to establish a running game, but yet last season and then that preseason game shows us that Peterson is not really prioritizing that establishment of the running game. So will we ever see him actually establish a running game?
Yeah, and that was my point, because he verbalizes it and he understands it needs to be done, but as I mentioned, sometimes it comes down to the DNA of a particular player, or in this case, a coach. and the fact that if something's not going right, he defaults to what he likes, and he likes to throw the football. And I think we might have to acknowledge that at some point, because when you're in a preseason environment, I can understand abandoning the running game in the regular season because you're trying to win a football game on any given Sunday. And if the running game isn't working, and the bottom line means something, you want to try to go get that win at all costs. But in a preseason environment where really winning and losing is secondary to preparation and evaluation, to default and go away from the running game because it's not going well, it just doesn't make sense to me. In fact, that's when you should double down on it, because you can, because it doesn't matter if you win the football game. And you need the live repetition if you can't do something. You're trying to improve. So I think it was very telling that Doug Pederson went away from the running game in that kind of environment, even though he pays the lip service to what he should be doing during the week.
John McMullen covers us for 97.3 ESPN.com, our Eagles insider. Also covers the NFL for FanRag Sports. John, speaking of offensive coaches who love to throw a ball a lot, a bit of a bizarre situation going on in New Orleans with cornerback Delvin Breo. You know, he went to get a second opinion, finding out that he has a fractured fibula, and then Sean Payton and the Saints decide to just fire their orthopedics, and goes on to say everyone wants a high level of accountability across the organization. I mean, talk about a bizarre situation down there.
Yeah, I kind of wish Sean Payton was somehow involved in the Sixers organization. That's a cheap shot. But, I mean, it is weird if you have a fractured fibula and the orthopedist can't diagnose it correctly. So, hey, it is a weird situation. It is a strange misdiagnosis. So I don't know the mechanics of exactly what happened, but obviously if you're going to make that kind of mistake, I mean, you're probably going to have to look for another job. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me that's the way the Saints went.
It's just, I mean, the whole way it played out is just so strange. Speaking also of strange, so following up on what Leonard Fournette said about, you know, the NFL really is slower than he thought, Derrick Henry, another former SEC guy, comes out and says that the NFL is a little bit faster than the SEC. Now, these guys are running backs, John. It's not like they're wide receivers or corners, so they're not exactly running around constantly. They're more so just going between the tackles or outside of tackles. But can we take any validity from what these guys are saying, that the difference between the SEC and the NFL isn't that much?
No, those SEC guys are weird. I mean, they really are. They have this mentality, and it is. I mean, I'll be the first to tell you the SEC is by far the toughest conference in college football, and they take a lot of pride that they play in it. And it generally carries over. And coaches talk a lot. It's not just the SEC, but it generally happens with big sort of football factory schools, Alabama, Ohio State, Florida State, schools like that, where young guys come in and they think, hey, this is the way we did it at Alabama. This is the way we should do it. And they got to learn that it is different in the NFL. There are no off days. As good as the SEC is, Alabama plays a schedule. You can look at it, and they're going to have 5 or 6 Saturdays essentially off, where it's a glorified scrimmage. That doesn't happen in the NFL, even if you're playing the Cleveland Browns or the New York Jets or another bad team. There's a lot of good football players on even the worst teams in the NFL. That's the biggest difference. Everybody's good in the NFL. A lot of people are good in the SEC, but all you do, as you know, look at any school and look at even the Alabamas and the LSUs of the world and the big-time schools that have had so much success sending people in the NFL. Look at the percentage of those particular rosters that end up in the NFL and then end up succeeding in the NFL. There is a big, big difference between SEC football and NFL football.
Yeah. So the Ezekiel Elliott case, John, will be heard by the famous or the infamous, depending on your perspective on him, Harold Henderson. For those who may say that name sounds familiar, well, he's the guy who heard Greg Hardy's appeal, and he was also the arbiter for the Adrian Peterson situation a few years ago. So it seems like, depending on what side of the fence you are, John, you think Henderson is impartial, or you think Henderson is, can't be impartial. So what do you think of Harold Henderson being the arbitrator here for the appeal?
Well, I'll just say this. If you see a picture of Harold Henderson, especially from the back, if you look at his back pocket really closely, you'll see a rubber stamp in it, because essentially that's all he is. People point to the Greg Hardy case because that's the one I think he went from 10 games to 4 games.
Yeah, 10 to 4.
Which is a pretty significant, obviously, downgrade. But the NFL tends to do these things on purpose. In other words, they probably had that in their mind. They really wanted to suspend Hardy for 4 games. You look tougher in the original suspension, then you look fairer. There's always a mindset to what they do. And it's set up, obviously, that Roger Goodell's in complete control, but the NFLPA collectively bargained that. I've talked about it consistently. Ezekiel Elliott's going to be suspended. So now the only question is, when is the suspension going to start? If he decides to fight and he wants to go to federal court, he most certainly will be able to get a stay at the lower levels and probably keep it going, maybe even all the way to next season. But ultimately, he will lose and he will be suspended. So the leverage he has is going into Harold Henderson, the negotiators, sort of back channels with the Cowboys, the NFLPA, and the league, and they could say, hey, look, knock it down to 4 games, and we won't take you to court. Maybe something like that could happen. But really, ultimately, this story has shifted into the strategy of the Elliott camp. Does he want to get it over with, or does he want to go to court and sort of put it on hold for this season?
He is John McMullen, covers the Eagles for 97.3 ESPN.com, also the NFL for FanRag Sports. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. John, before I let you go, I'm a little disappointed today because one of the guys I am rooting for to make a roster right now has a concussion. I want to see Rico Gathers make the Cowboys team, John. I really do. I want to see a 6'8", 280-pound tight end who can dunk run around a football field all season.
You already see that every week. It's Jimmy Graham. It was 6'6", 270. He's actually lost weight. But, yeah, I mean, he's an interesting prospect because of those reasons. And we've seen it in the past. Antonio Gates also had a basketball background before turning into he's going to be a Hall of Fame tight end. Jimmy Graham, obviously. People are always looking for that. Julius Thomas, when the Broncos got him out of nowhere, and he turned into a star. Everyone's looking for that type of player. And he certainly has the physical ability to do some of that. And it would have been interesting because he certainly has the athleticism, and he was a heck of a college basketball player, as you know.
Yeah, he was. He actually averaged a double-double one season at Baylor. So I mean, it's not like he was some scrub coming off the bench kind of thing. So
no, he and there was a lot of teams interested in him for that reason, but they all knew he was a raw, obviously developmental prospect. Hadn't played football since high school, but the athleticism is there.
Yeah. All right, John, appreciate you coming on, as always, as you do each and every day at this time. This is your slot. We appreciate you coming on. Don't worry, Pete, we'll be back tomorrow.
All right, thanks, Josh.